In 1964, Ford decided to build a car that would dominate the drag strip, and that is exactly what they did. In the early 1960s, Detroit's Big Three, Ford, GM, and Chrysler, were locked in a high-octane arms race, and the battlefield was the drag strip. The National Hot Rod Association, or the NHRA, had become the proving ground for factory muscle, where horsepower reigned and reputations were made or broken in just a few hundred feet. Ford, hungry to reclaim dominance from Chrysler's Max Wedge cars and Chevrolet's aggressive entries, decided to fire back with something radical. The result wasn't just a faster Fairlane. It was the birth of the Thunderbolt. The idea started within Ford's own performance division, specifically the Special Vehicles Department, in collaboration with Dearborn Steel Tubing, DST, the company's go-to builder for experimental race cars. They took the mid-size Fairlane 500 two-door post sedan not because it was glamorous, but because it was the lightest body Ford had that could legally accommodate the massive 427 cubic inch engine under NHRA superstock rules. This wasn't just an engine swap, it was a full-blown engineering project. DST didn't just drop in the 427 and call it a day. The Thunderbolt was stripped down and rebuilt with drag racing in mind, from bumper to bumper. Ford's goal was clear: build a limited run of cars that were technically street legal but would obliterate the quarter mile straight off the showroom floor. The plan was bold. NHRA regulations required at least 50 units to qualify for superstock, so Ford committed to producing 100. The first 11 cars were painted in a striking vintage burgundy with gold lettering, a nod to their racing pedigree. The remaining 89 were finished in Wimbledon white, giving them a clean, understated look that belied the monster hiding under the hood. On paper, it was a Fairlane. In execution, it was a factory hot rod unlike anything else at the time. No luxury, no frills, just brute force speed and an obsessive focus on performance. While Chevrolet and Mopar continued to battle with more conventional strategies, Ford had created something special: a street-legal missile specifically designed to smoke the competition and rewrite the rules of drag racing. If the 1964 Fairlane Thunderbolt had a soul, it lived in the engine bay, and it wasn't subtle. The heart of this beast was Ford's legendary 427 cubic inch V8, known internally as the FE Series high-riser engine. This wasn't just any block. It was the same powerhouse that had already terrorized NASCAR tracks and helped Ford dominate endurance racing. But in the Thunderbolt, this engine had a different mission: pure, unrelenting quarter-mile destruction. On paper, Ford rated it at 425 horsepower, but anyone familiar with the car knew that number was just a smokescreen for NHRA compliance. In reality, this engine could crank out close to 600 horsepower in race trim thanks to a high-rise aluminum intake manifold, dual Holley 4-barrel carburetors, and monstrous breathing capability. The high-riser setup raised the intake runners several inches above the heads, improving airflow and making the engine an absolute terror at high RPMs. Paired with a solid lifter camshaft and forged internals, the Thunderbolt's 427 wasn't just powerful. It was purpose-built for the brutal, repetitive punishment of drag racing. But stuffing a big engine into a mid-size car wasn't enough. Ford and Dearborn Steel Tubing had to re-engineer parts of the car to make it work and survive. For starters, the front suspension was heavily modified. The shock towers were cut and repositioned to make room for the giant heads and intake manifold, while the inner fenders were reshaped or trimmed back. Because the engine sat so close to the strut towers, even routine maintenance like changing spark plugs became a delicate operation. Mechanics joked that you needed the fingers of a pianist to work on one. And yet, this car was sold through Ford dealers. Technically, you could drive one home. In reality, few people ever did. The Thunderbolt was temperamental, loud, and raw. It didn't idle well, it overheated in traffic, and it didn't come with a warranty. But on the strip, it was a rocket ship. The standard transmission options were just as hardcore. Buyers could choose between a 4-speed manual top loader or a heavy-duty 3-speed automatic. Both came equipped with 4.11-to-1 rear gears and a beefed-up 9-inch rear axle that could take the abuse. Even the smallest details were optimized for the track. the battery was relocated to the trunk for better weight distribution. The air induction system routed air through the headlight buckets directly into the carburetors, an ingenious workaround that added cool, dense air without cluttering the underhood area. The wheels were skinny up front and wide in the rear, built to hook hard off the line and keep the car tracking straight. All of this came at a price. The Thunderbolt wasn't cheap. It cost around $3,900 in 1964, which was a lot of money for what was essentially a gutted Fairlane with a monster motor. But it wasn't built for daily drivers or car show polishers. It was built for racers who wanted to win, and it worked. When the Thunderbolt finally thundered onto the NHRA circuit in 1964, it didn't just show up. It arrived like a sledgehammer through the rulebook. This wasn't a car that eased into competition. It exploded out of the gate, leaving a trail of disbelief, broken records, and shattered egos in its wake. The other factories, Chrysler with its max wedge cars and Chevrolet with its high-revving 409, suddenly looked like they were playing catch-up. Because the Thunderbolt didn't just beat them, it blew past them like they were parked. The NHRA Superstock class was supposed to be a showcase of production vehicles, cars anyone could theoretically buy at a dealership. But with the Thunderbolt, Ford had taken that concept to the edge of the rulebook and looked over the cliff. It was barely street legal, but it was legal, and that was all Ford needed. Behind the wheel were some of the most skilled factory-backed drivers of the era. Legends like Gas Rhonda, Dick Brannon, Phil Bonner, and Butch Leal piloted Thunderbolts in match races and official NHRA events, racking up wins and building fearsome reputations. Rhonda's burgundy Thunderbolt was a fan favorite, easily recognizable as it left its rivals choking on tire smoke. At the 1964 NHRA Nationals in Indianapolis, the crown jewel of the drag racing calendar, the Thunderbolt sealed their victory. Ford's factories went head-to-head with Mopar's finest, including the new Hemi-powered Dodges in the fiercely competitive Superstock class. In a stunning performance, Ford took home the trophy, proving the Thunderbolt wasn't just fast in theory or in testing. It was fast when it counted. By the time the season ended, Ford's competitors were scrambling. Chrysler went back to the drawing board, working to get the new 426 Hemi into its Superstockers, and GM, under a racing ban, could only watch from the sidelines. But NHRA wasn't blind to what was happening. The Thunderbolt had pushed the stock in Superstock to its breaking point. Its lightweight construction, specialized parts, and limited production numbers created controversy. By 1965, the NHRA changed its rules to prevent cars like the Thunderbolt from returning. It had been too dominant, too radical, and too much of a threat to the competition. But for that brief moment in 1964, the Thunderbolt owned the strip. It had done exactly what Ford built it to do: annihilate the best Detroit had to offer, win a national title, and make damn sure everyone knew Ford wasn't just in the game, but ahead of it. Only 100 Thunderbolts were ever produced, just enough to meet NHRA's homologation rules. Of those, about 49 came with manual transmissions and the rest were automatics. Each one was hand-assembled by Dearborn steel tubing, and no two were exactly the same. The 1964 Fairlane Thunderbolt wasn't just a car. It was a wake-up call. It showed the world what could happen when a major automaker built a race car with one goal in mind: domination. It paved the way for future factory drag machines like the Copo Camaros, Hemi Darts, and modern-day Cobra Jet Mustangs. But more than that, it proved that performance could be engineered with surgical precision, not just raw power, but smart weight reduction, calculated airflow, and obsessive tuning. In one season, the Thunderbolt earned its place in muscle car history, not by lasting long, but by burning twice as bright.